The morning my daughter-in-law slid a deed across my breakfast table and asked me to sign away my lake house. My granddaughter was sitting less than 30 feet away. Hattie was 9 years old. She was on the back porch, leaning over a sketchbook, drawing the great blue heron that had started coming to the dock every morning that summer. She had powdered sugar on her chin from the pancakes. Her sneakers were untied. She looked up once when the screen door opened, smiled at me with powdered sugar on her lip, and went back to her drawing. She did not hear the conversation that followed. She only felt the silence change. And I remember thinking, as I looked at the papers my daughter-in-law had just placed beside my plate, that Hattie deserved to grow up without understanding what that silence was made of. But before I tell you what I did that morning, you need to understand what was at stake. Not just the house. The house was almost the smallest part of it. The lake house on Long Pond was built in 1987. My wife Helen and I were 31 years old, broke in the way that feels romantic before the bills arrive, and convinced that if we did the work ourselves, we could afford something that felt like a real life. I carried lumber until my shoulders locked. Helen sanded window frames in the August heat with sawdust in her hair and a level she had borrowed from her brother and never returned. We stained the pine ceiling by hand. Helen insisted on that. She said if the ceiling was going to last 40 years, she wanted to be the one who touched every inch of it. I thought she was being sentimental. But that was Helen. She loved things with her whole body. On the last weekend before we moved the furniture in, we sat on the unfinished porch in folding chairs with beers we could barely afford, watching the last light leave Long Pond. Helen put her feet up on the railing, closed her eyes, and said, "This is ours. Nobody can take it." I remember thinking she was being dramatic. I was wrong about that too. We raised Marcus in that house during the summers. He learned to fish off dock before he learned long division. He lost his first tooth on the porch rail. He had his first heartbreak sitting in the same chair where Helen used to drink her coffee, wrapped in her blue cardigan, watching the morning fog lift off the water. When Marcus was born, late and difficult and into a January snowstorm that closed every road between Augusta and Portland, I held him in the delivery room while the lights flickered, and Helen laughed and cried at the same time. She said, "He waited for the worst possible night. He gets that from you." I think about that line a lot now. To understand the Sunday of the deed, you need to understand what happened before it. Not all at once. It happened slowly, the way water works its way into old wood. You do not notice the damage until the morning you press your foot down and feel something give. I met Bryn in 2016. My son had been seeing her for about 4 months before he brought her to the lake house. And when she walked through my front door, she looked around the living room the way a person does when they are deciding what they would keep and what they would throw out. She complimented Helen's silverware before she complimented the food. Helen laughed when I mentioned it later. She said I was being suspicious. But Helen noticed things too. She just preferred to hope she was wrong. The moment I stopped hoping came at Helen's reception. My wife was gone in 11 weeks. Pancreatic cancer does not give you time to argue. One day I was calling the specialist's office for a second opinion, and 3 weeks later I was signing papers in a hospital corridor I had walked through so many times, I stopped reading the room numbers. We held the reception at the lake house because that was where Helen had been happiest. Her sister drove up from Providence. Her brother flew in from Phoenix. People brought casseroles and flowers and sat on the back porch and told stories I had never heard, which was the strangest gift of all. Helen's sister was still setting out deviled eggs on the blue plate, the one Helen bought at a yard sale and used for everything, when Bryn found me near the kitchen doorway. She touched my arm gently, like someone who wanted to be sure I felt it. "Theo," she said quietly, "have you thought about estate planning?" I looked at her. I waited for the shame to arrive on her face. It never came. She held my gaze with those sharp gray eyes and said, "I just want you to be taken care of." I said, "Not today, Bryn." She smiled and stepped back toward the living room like we had been discussing the weather. But I stood in that kitchen doorway for another minute, listening to Helen's sister talk about the deviled egg recipe, and I understood something I had been trying not to see. My daughter-in-law did not look at me and see a grieving man. She saw an open window. After Helen was gone, the visits became less frequent. There was always a reason, a school commitment, a work conflict, a stomach bug, a birthday party in Falmouth. Every excuse was reasonable on its own, and that was the design of it. You cannot argue with a school play. You cannot fight a sick child. So you stay quiet, and you miss them, and you tell yourself it is just a busy season. But the seasons kept being busy. When they did come to the lake house, Bryn walked through my rooms like she was checking inventory. She opened closets without asking. She asked about the back lot and what it was worth per acre. Once I saw her photographing Helen's wedding china with her phone angled low. The screen tilted away from me like she thought my vision was going. My vision was fine. I said nothing. I told myself the silence was the price of keeping them close, that I was being patient, the way old men learn to be patient when the alternative is losing everything they love. What I did not understand was that silence had already cost me everything that mattered. By the time that Sunday arrived, I had not seen Marcus alone, without Bryn directing the conversation, in more than a year. That morning was blueberry pancakes and a pan of bacon in Long Pond Silver and Flat outside the porch rail. Hattie had arrived the night before, already asking to name the heron. I had slept better than I had in months just knowing she was asleep down the hall. Then Bryn reached into her leather tote and placed a manila folder beside my plate. Colored tabs, professional tabs, the kind an attorney uses to tell you exactly where to look and where to sign. "Theo," she said, "we need to talk about the property. Not my home, not the lake house, the property." I looked at Marcus, who was sitting 3 feet from me at the same table where he had eaten hundreds of meals as a boy. His thumb was moving slowly across his phone screen. Not texting, not reading, hiding. Bryn explained that the house had become too much for a man my age. The roof, the dock, the taxes, the long winters, the maintenance on a property this size. She had clearly rehearsed the list. Her voice was warm and practiced, the voice she used when she wanted to sound concerned. She opened the folder and slid the deed across the table toward me. She had already filled in their names. I looked at the deed for a long moment. Then I looked at my son. "Marcus," I said. His thumb stopped, but he did not look up. "Marcus," I said again. He finally raised his eyes. He looked at me the way he had when he was 7 years old and had broken Helen's favorite blue vase. The same downward pull at the corners of his mouth, the same shoulder drop. Except he was not 7. He was 41, and this was not a broken vase. He said nothing. Bryn answered for him. "Your father knows this is the responsible thing, Marcus." I kept my eyes on my son for one more moment. I wanted one sentence. One sentence was all I needed. Just say something. Just be here. Just be the boy I carried through the snow. But Marcus said nothing. And that silence was when I understood something I should have understood years before. He had not come to this breakfast as my son. He had come as her witness. I pushed the folder back across the table. "I am not signing this," I said. For the first time that morning, something cracked in Bryn's expression. Not much, just enough to see what was underneath. "Theo, do not be unreasonable. This is not a discussion," I said. This house is not going into your names. Not today, not next year, not when I am no longer here to stop it." Her face changed completely. The practiced warmth disappeared, and what was underneath it was cold and bare and furious. "You are being selfish," she said, her voice sharpening. "Marcus has supported this family for years. You sit here alone in a house too large for one person, pretending memories pay property taxes. This is irresponsible. This is childish. This is exactly the kind of decision that will cost Hattie her inheritance." I felt something in my chest go very still. "This is the house where my wife spent her last good summer," I said. "This is where my granddaughter learned to swim. This is where Helen touched every inch of that ceiling with her own hands. This is my home. It is not an asset on a spreadsheet. It is my home." Bryn stood so quickly, the chair legs scraped across the porch floor. What happened next, I am still not entirely able to explain. I have turned the moment over many times, and it still surprises me that a human being would do it. In front of her own daughter, in my home, at my breakfast table. She reached across and slapped me. The sound cracked across the porch like a plank splitting in a cold snap. My hearing aid flew out and skidded across the boards. My cheek burned. I tasted blood from the inside of my lip where my teeth had caught the skin. And then there was absolute silence. I did not move right away. I sat there for a moment, feeling my own heartbeat, thinking this is actually happening. This has actually happened. The kind of thought that surprises you even when part of you knew it was coming. Then I looked at my son. Marcus had gone pale. His phone was face down on the table. He was looking at my face, then at Bryn's hand, then back at my face. I saw the calculation happen in real time. I watched my son weigh the cost of speaking against the cost of silence. I watched him choose. He sighed. "Dad," he said quietly, "why do you always have to make everything so difficult? If you have ever had a child look at you from across a table and choose someone else, then you know what that sentence costs, not in the moment, in the bone. In the place where you store every birthday and every bandage and every time you drove through the dark to bring them home." I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I bent down, picked up my hearing aid from the porch floor, wiped it carefully on the corner of my shirt, and placed it back in my ear. When I straightened up, I said, "Go upstairs, pack your things. You are leaving this house today." Bryn blinked. "Theo, do not be dramatic." "You struck me in my own home," I said, in earshot of a 9-year-old child. Marcus tried again. "Dad, come on." "No," I said. "The time for that ended when your wife put her hand on my face and you asked why I was being difficult." I stood, walked through the porch door, and went down to the dock where Hattie was still drawing her heron. I sat down beside her and told her Grandpa needed to make a few phone calls. She looked at me, looked at my cheek, and said nothing. She just moved her sketchbook closer to me, so our arms were touching. I made the first call to my attorney. The second was to my financial advisor. And by the time Bryn had decided I was calming down, I had already done the most important work of the morning. My attorney's name was Margaret Sutherland. She had been mine since 1994, handled every contract, every estate document, every decision I had ever needed another clear head for. When I described the morning, the folder, the slap, the sentence from Marcus, she was quiet for several seconds. Then she said, "Do not let them take anything. I am getting in the car." My financial advisor, Carter Mendelson, picked up on the second ring. I told him I needed 3 things. First, freeze every account Marcus had access to. The brokerage account, the inherited retirement account he had been quietly treating as a personal line of credit, and the operating account from my old firm that he drew from under the guise of old consulting work. Second, amend the trust, Marcus removed as beneficiary, my granddaughter Hattie made primary, a corporate trustee to manage distributions. No parent, no guardian, no spouse, no outside party able to request funds without trustee review. Third, prepare a partition action on their house in Falmouth. I still own 20% of it. Carter went quiet for a moment. Theo, he said carefully, you understand what that means. It means they either buy out my share at fair market value or the court orders the property sold. And if they cannot afford the buyout, then they sell the house. There was a long pause on the line. Theo, are you sure? I looked back at the porch, at the floor where my hearing aid had bounced off the boards. Carter, I said, they came here for my house. Now they can learn what it feels like to lose theirs. The history of that Falmouth house mattered, and I want to explain it because Bryn had apparently forgotten it. In 2014, when Marcus and Helen came to me about the down payment, I agreed on one condition. Helen's condition, actually, though Marcus thought it was mine. We did not simply wire $68,000 and walk away. We retained 20% ownership as tenants in common. A quiet piece of equity that stayed on the deed, undiscussed, largely forgotten. Except not by Helen, and not by me. On the drive home from that signing, Helen had said to me, "We may need that someday." I asked her what she meant. She looked out the passenger window at the trees and said, "I just don't trust that woman." Helen had been right about many things in our life together. She was most right about that. When I walked back from the dock, Bryn was standing in my kitchen with red eyes and a glass of water she had not touched. Marcus leaned against the counter the way he always did when he was waiting for someone else to decide what kind of trouble he was in. Bryn spoke first. "Theo," she said softly, eyes glistening, "I want to apologize." I looked at her carefully. The tears were real. The regret was not. I have known enough people in my life to understand the difference between someone who is sorry for what they did and someone who is sorry they did not get what they wanted. Bryn's apology had the texture of the second kind. The words were correct. The face was arranged beautifully. But her voice was still tight at the edges, still measuring, still calculating how much softness was needed to undo the damage. "I was emotional," she said. "Work has been impossible, the mortgage, Hattie's school. I just reached my limit and I—" "Stop," I said. She blinked. "You came here with a prepared deed," I said. "You brought a folder with colored tabs to a Sunday breakfast. That is not someone who lost control. That is someone who had a plan." She opened her mouth. "You planned to come here and take my home," I said. "The only thing that was unplanned was that I said no." For one full second, neither of them spoke. Then I turned to Marcus because I had already answered every question Bryn was going to ask me. The real conversation was with my son. "I need you to hear this," I said. He looked up. "For 34 years, I gave you everything I knew how to give. School, car, law degree, the down payment on your house. I never called it a debt. I never held it over you. I gave it because you were my son, and because Helen and I believed that was what love looked like." His eyes filled, but I did not stop. "But today I needed one thing from you. One sentence. I needed you to tell your wife she does not get to put her hand on your father." Marcus opened his mouth. "And you sighed," I said. "You asked why I was being difficult." The kitchen was very quiet. "The papers Margaret is bringing today are not revenge," I said. "They are clarity. You are going to learn what your life looks like when my money is no longer in the walls." Bryn whispered something about Hattie, about punishing a child for adult arguments, about how I was being cruel. I had been waiting for Hattie's name to come back into the room. I had known it would. "Hattie is the only person I am protecting," I said. I kept my voice flat because flat was the most honest I could be in that moment. She is 9 years old. She does not understand deeds or trusts or how adults dress greed up as concern. But one day she will. And when that day arrives, there will be something left for her that you cannot reach. I looked at my son one more time. You both came here for keys, I said. You forgot that the only person who ever earned them was the little girl on the dock drawing a heron. Margaret arrived 38 minutes later. Her tires on my gravel driveway were the best sound I heard all day. She stepped out in a navy coat with her reading glasses already hanging from a chain around her neck and a banker's box under her arm, the kind she only carried when she meant to be thorough. When she reached the porch, she looked at my cheek for a long moment. "Theodore," she said quietly, "we are going to handle this." By the time Bryn and Marcus drove away, the folders still sat on the breakfast table beside the cold pancakes and Hattie's half-empty orange juice glass. Margaret picked up the deed with 2 fingers, read the names already printed in the transfer lines, and let out a single breath through her nose. She came prepared, she said. So will I said. We worked until nearly 10 that evening. First, a formal demand letter regarding the Falmouth property and my 20%. Second, instructions to amend the trust, removing Marcus from direct inheritance and placing Hattie under managed protection. Helen's sister Roberta agreed to serve as trustee. She had taught middle school mathematics for 32 years, balanced her checkbook to the penny, and once made a bank manager apologize in writing for miscalculating $11 in quarterly interest. If there was one person alive who Bryn could not charm, confuse, or pressure, it was Roberta. The trust document was very specific. No parent, guardian, spouse, or outside representative could request distributions on Hattie's behalf without trustee review. Education, medical care, housing, and necessary support would be considered. Lifestyle expenses, business investments, emergency loans, and family financial emergencies would not. Then Margaret read me the last clause she had added after looking at my face. Under no circumstances shall Bryn serve as trustee, co-trustee, advisor, or financial representative to the beneficiary. I read that sentence for a long time. Then I signed it. Third, the revised estate plan removing my son from my personal inheritance. Margaret paused before printing the final version. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. Are you absolutely certain? I looked out toward the dock, where Hattie had been drawing before the world changed. Yes, I said, my son can rebuild trust, but he does not inherit what he refused to protect. The consequences did not arrive like thunder. That was the part Bryn had not prepared for. She understood pressure. She understood softness and guilt and the long, slow weight of family obligation. She had come to that breakfast table because she had spent years watching me give Marcus everything he asked for, and she had decided the house was simply the next item on the list. What she had not calculated was what happened when the list closed. By Monday afternoon, Marcus called to tell me the brokerage account had locked him out. I let it go to voicemail. Then I let the next 4 calls go to voicemail. By Tuesday morning, the operating line from the old firm was closed. For almost 3 years, Marcus had been pulling money from it under the cover of old consulting work he no longer actually did. I had told myself the money helped Hattie. It had helped Bryn redecorate the kitchen in Falmouth. That ended before noon. By Wednesday, Carter had filed the partition action on the Falmouth house. No shouting, no speech, no confrontation in a parking lot. Just paperwork arriving in an attorney's inbox with quiet, precise legal language that was impossible to argue with because it was simply true. Bryn called me Wednesday afternoon. I almost let it ring through. Then I thought, I want to hear this exact moment. She started talking before I finished saying hello. Have you lost your mind? She said, her voice high and furious. You are trying to force us out of our home. Hattie's home. Are you really going to do this because of one morning? Because I apologized? You apologized for losing control, I said. You did not apologize for coming to my home with a deed you had already filled out. We cannot afford to buy you out, she said. Her voice had changed. The anger was still there, but underneath it now was something real, something she had not expected to feel. I know, I said. There was a long pause. Theo, her voice had gone quiet. Please. I have thought about what you asked me to sign, I said. I have thought about what I gave your husband throughout his adult life, and I have thought about what he gave back to me on that porch. I wish you well, Bryn. I hope you find a good home. You are a cruel old man, she said. No, I said. I am an old man who finally read the paperwork before signing. I hung up before she could say Hattie's name again. For the first time in years, the silence after her voice disappeared felt like something worth keeping. The next morning, I called a locksmith from Bath and had every lock on the property changed. Front door, back door, boathouse, storage shed. The side entrance Helen always forgot to lock until the first frost. I stood beside the locksmith while each deadbolt came out and a new one went in. When he handed me the new keys, I held them for a moment longer than necessary. The metal felt different, heavier somehow. Or maybe I was just finally feeling the actual weight of what I owned. I walked through every room afterward, touched the back of the kitchen chairs, ran my hand along the counter, stopped at the mudroom basket where Helen's blue cardigan still sat folded, smelling faintly of lake air and cedar. Nothing had moved. Everything had changed. The house was quiet. And this time, the quiet belonged to me. The Friday after the breakfast, I signed the amended trust documents with Margaret at the kitchen table. I read every page twice, then a third time, because I wanted each word to land exactly where it needed to land. Hattie was named primary beneficiary. Roberta was named trustee. The document was clear in the places that needed to be clear, and airtight in the places where other documents had soft edges. When I finished reading, I looked up at Margaret. This protects her, she said. That is all I need it to do, I said. 8 days after the slap, Marcus came back alone. His SUV sat in my driveway for almost 20 minutes before the door opened. He walked up to the house looking like a man who had not slept and was no longer sure what he was going to say when he got there. I let him in. I poured coffee. We sat on the same porch. He started explaining. Bryn's stress, the mortgage, the pressure, the way things had built up over time. I let him talk for about a minute. Then I raised my hand. Tell me what you are sorry for, I said. Not what she was going through. What are you sorry for? His face broke apart. I'm sorry I didn't say anything, he said. His voice was very small. I'm sorry I just sat there. I'm sorry I let her do that to you. Why did you? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. The lake moved outside the rail. A gull called somewhere off the far bank. Because I am afraid of her, he said. I want to be honest about what that sentence did to me. It did not heal anything. It explained the wound, which is not the same as closing it. My son had been afraid of his wife and had let that fear turn him into a man who watched someone strike his father and reached for his phone. That was not something I could fix. Here is what I can offer you, I said. He looked at me the way a boy looks at a door he is not sure will open. The disinheritance stands, the partition stands, the accounts stay closed. Those things were never earned. They were given, and I am taking them back. He nodded slowly. But the door to this house is not closed to you, I said. It is closed to her. If you want to be here, and if you want Hattie to be here, that can happen. But not on Bryn's terms, not with her standing between us and calling it peace. What if I cannot leave her? He asked. I looked at my son for a long time. Then you have made your choice, I said. "And I will make mine," he cried again. I did not move to comfort him. Some lessons lose their meaning if someone else pays the price. 4 months later, the new arrangement was official. Hattie would come to the lake house 1 weekend a month. Marcus would drive her, Marcus would collect her. Bryn would not set foot on the property, would not wait in the driveway, and would not use Hattie as a go-between. A family attorney had written all of it down, so there was no room for reinterpretation. The first Saturday Hattie came back under the new arrangement. She ran down the hall in her pink jacket and held on to me so hard I felt it in my back. "Can we make pancakes?" she asked. I looked past her at Marcus standing by the front door, his hands in his jacket pockets, looking worn but present. "Yes," I said, "we can make pancakes." She pulled me toward the kitchen. And for one morning, the house breathed. The Falmouth house sold in April. I did not attend the closing. I did not need to. Margaret handled the documentation, Carter confirmed the transfer, and my 20% came back to me by wire on a Thursday afternoon. I looked at the deposit confirmation for a few seconds, then closed the laptop. The money did not make me happy, but it proved something I needed proved: that consequences are real, and that they arrive whether or not you make a speech. Marcus and Bryn moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Westbrook. I heard through my neighbor Doris, who heard through her son, who lived 2 streets over. In a small state, information moves the way weather does. Bryn told people I was controlling, vindictive, and dangerous. She said I had punished my son over wounded pride. She left out the deed. She left out the slap. She left out the fact that she had arrived at a widower's home on a Sunday morning with a folder of colored tabs and my signature already selected. Then Helen's sister, Roberta, did something I had not asked her to do. At a small family lunch in Portland, when Bryn's version of events had started circulating around the table, Roberta opened her purse and took out a single document. Margaret's formal demand letter. She found the relevant paragraph and read one sentence aloud, clearly, without editorial comment. Mrs. Bryn attempted to obtain a signed property transfer from Mr. Theodore after presenting a prepared deed at his private residence. No one shouted. No one stood up, but from what I heard, Bryn stopped talking before dessert was served. I did not need to correct her after that. For years, she had mistaken silence for weakness. She was now discovering that silence could also look like a locked front door, a partition filing, and a sold house. Marcus still calls me on Sunday evenings now. We have dinner once a month at a diner in Brunswick, halfway between Long Pond and Westbrook, under yellow lights in a corner booth where nobody knows us. We talk about Hattie, her drawings, her school project on migratory birds, the names she has given to the clouds she photographs on the drive up to see me. We do not talk about Bryn. Not yet. But I notice changes in my son. He listens before he speaks. He stops making excuses before they finish forming. Once, his phone lit up with her name during dinner, and he looked at it, turned it face down, and said, "This hour is for Hattie and you." It was not a grand speech. He said it quietly, like someone who was still learning what it felt like to say a true thing out loud. For Marcus, it was the first fence he had ever built with his own hands. I will not pretend this is a clean ending. My son is still married to the woman who slapped me on my own porch while my granddaughter drew birds 30 feet away. There are graduations and Christmases and moments ahead where I may have to be in the same room as Bryn and decide, again, what kind of man I want to be. Some nights the weight of that comes down on me harder than I expect. But the lake house is still mine. The porch is still mine. The ceiling Helen stained by hand is still above me. The trust is locked so tightly that Bryn could spend the rest of her life looking for a crack and never find one. Hattie is safe inside it. When she comes on Sunday mornings, she still asks for blueberry pancakes. She still runs down the hall in her pajamas. She still sits at the table with powdered sugar on her chin, telling me about school and birds, and the names she has invented for clouds. On those mornings, I understand what I was actually protecting. Not the house. Not the money. Not even the porch where Helen watched the fog lift off the water. I was protecting the right to decide who gets a key to my life. And for the first time in years, every key is where it belongs. I have had a long time to sit with the question of what I did wrong before that Sunday. The honest answer is that I was generous in the wrong direction for too long. I gave Marcus money when what he needed was accountability. I gave Bryn access when what she deserved was distance. I gave silence when the moment required a sentence. Love is not a checkbook, but I spent years acting like it was. Somewhere along the way, my giving stopped being received as love and started being expected as a right. And once that shift happens, the person giving has a choice. They can keep paying and call it peace, or they can stop and learn who really wanted them at the table. I stopped, and I found out. The people who truly love you do not measure your worth by what they can inherit when you are gone. They protect your dignity while you are still here. I should have spoken sooner. I cannot change that. But I can say this: it is never too late to stop signing away pieces of yourself. Not at 40, not at 68. The day you decide your dignity matters is the day the locks can change, the papers can be rewritten, and the people who mistook your kindness for weakness can finally meet the part of you they never prepared for. I should have spoken sooner, but I can speak now, and the keys to my home are still mine. So tell me, if you had been sitting at that table, with the folder in front of you, and your child looking away, and someone across the table reaching for what was never theirs, what would you have done? Would you have signed to keep the peace? Would you have forgiven the slap because there was a grandchild in the middle? Or would you have finally stood up, changed the locks, and reminded everyone that kindness is not the same as surrender? Leave a comment below. I mean it. Tell me what happened when it was your turn. Tell me whether you stayed silent or whether you found the courage later than you wanted, but still just in time. Because someone reading right now may be sitting at their own table watching the first folder slide across the wood. And they need to know they are not alone. Subscribe for more stories about truth, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to finally take your life back. Because the day someone reaches for what is yours, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is keep the keys in your own hand.